Thank you for coming this afternoon. Thank you for taking time out to spend with us. Good to see so many people here that I know. Really good. I've got glasses still. It'll come. Alrighty. Look, guys, this afternoon I want to talk to you about, if you're looking for a topic to put at the top of your notes, it's called From Fear to Faith. I want to talk to you about what, for me, is one of the most amazing battles that has ever taken place in the history of mankind. I want to talk to you about who was involved, how it came to be, and just the learnings that we can take from that. I want to talk to you about Gideon. I want to talk to you about a man who was described as a warrior, and he knew in his heart that he was not. I want to talk to you about the fear that he was living in and that he found his life in. I want to talk to you about how we can find ourselves in those same places, but how God delivered him. That he took him from that place of fear and he brought him to a place where he was a warrior to be remembered for all time. I want to talk to you about the fact that God saw in him something that he could never see in himself. But what God sees is what's true and what's real. Not always what we see in ourselves. Amen? Have you ever found yourself where you're doubting who you are and what your capabilities are and what power and influence you can have on circumstances, and you look at it upon yourself as to, there's no way that I can do this, there's no way that I can move forward from this situation. I want to talk to you about today that it's got nothing to do with you. It's got everything to do with God and what his power and his guidance and his direction in your life. Gideon is the perfect example of being able to let go of the doubts and fears that we may have in our life. Being able to step forward in faith and claim the victory in circumstances where we cannot see them for ourselves, but God can see them for us. Gideon faced his fears. He stepped out of his doubt. He removed himself from the prison of fear that he lived in. At Sunshine Coast, that's like a $20 fine. I don't know if it is here. And he stepped into the plan that God had for his life. And I want to talk you through how we need to look at how we can do that in our own lives as well. I'm going to get you to turn to I nearly said Gideon 6, but it's not. It's Judges 6. All right. There's some key points that I want to be able to bring forward today. When we step out, these are the four things. So if you're writing down four things that you're meant to take home from your talk, these are the four things. Once you've written these down, you're free to go. When we step out of fear and into faith, God works miracles. Number 2, God knows who you are even when you don't. Number 3, it is not your battle, it is his, for his glory. And the fourth one is that it is his plan and it's not your plan. Let's have a look. Judges 6. In Judges 6, we find that Israel is coming off a time of relative ease. They've had some really good years behind them. They're living in the land of promise. They have some amazing things that they've been brought into, and things are good. The bills are paid, the kids are behaving, they're doing well at school, business is good, everything is coming up roses for them at the moment. Everything is going really well for them. Interest rates are low, housing prices are low, everything's really good for them. But as it tends to happen, and as tends to happen often for Israel, they forgot what got them there in the first place. They forgot that it was God who brought them into that situation. They moved away from that and they started to dwell more on the fact that, how good are we? Look at what we've been brought in. Look at all these things that we've been able to do. And they became self-sufficient. They didn't need God, and they started worshipping other idols. I want you to have a think about that for us, for you and for your life, what that means. Sometimes we find ourselves in those circumstances where we think, everything's just going really, really well. I've got all these things going on. I'm so good at life. Well done, me. I'm doing so well at this. Then things changed. God recognised what Israel was going through at this time. And as was his tendency at those times, he sent some trials and tribulations their way to remind them of what it was that had brought them to that wonderful place that they were living in the first place. He shook things up, and he did that by rousing an enemy against them to show how hard life could be actually without God in it. Judges 6, verse 1. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. And because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them dens which are in the mountain, and caves and strongholds. They went and hid in the mountains. They went, we are fleeing from these people. We are getting away from these people. We're going to go and hide wherever we can. This is Israel, who had God on their side, who had overcome all their previous enemies, knowing that God was with them. They'd forgotten that. They'd forgotten who was on their side, and they fled for the mountains because they didn't want to face these people. And so it was Israel, so verse 3, and so it was, when Israel had sown, the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites and the children of the east, and even they came up against them. Everybody was coming against these guys. And they encamped against them and destroyed the increase of the earth till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. They would come in, they'd see that the crops were ready, and they would just pilfer the whole thing. They would take crops, they would take animals, they would take everything from Israel. They'd sweep through and go, no, we're taking everything from you. For they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude. For both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. And Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. Israel was living in fear. All these things that now come against them, they'd turned their back on God. They'd turned to other idols. And when I want you to think of idols, back in those days, they were worshipping other gods. For us today, I want you to think about that, maybe we don't have, a temple, a stone monument in the garden that we bow down to, but there will be things that take our life away from God, that cause us to put a higher priority on those things than it does with our walk in the Lord. Whether it be work, whether it be hobbies that we have, whether it be a family, whatever it might be, they are those things. They are the idols that potentially in our life. They're things that distract us from what is most important in our life, and that relationship that we have with our God and Father. Those are those idols that can come up in our lives. Those things that take us away from what is truly important in our life. Israel was trapped in dens and caves by what they perceived to be an enemy that was far too strong for them to conquer. They just couldn't see a way out. Have you ever found yourself in those circumstances, where you found yourself in a place where it's just, I can't see a way out here. I can't see how I'm going to have any impact on this. This is just too overwhelming for me. I don't know the way out or what I can do. Has anyone ever found themselves in that position before? I have. I absolutely have, yeah. They lived in fear for 7 years, 7 long years of the enemy coming against them and beating them down and forcing them to live in caves. They had forgotten their history and what God had called them into and who they were as sons and daughters of the living God. They'd forgotten that. And they'd focused more on who they felt they were and what they had done, and they become far more self-sufficient as a result and less sufficient on God. In verse 7, and there came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak, which was the Ophrah, and that pertained unto Joshua the Abazirite. and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. He was threshing wheat in a winepress. When you thresh wheat, you're meant to go to the top of a hill where the wind is blowing to thresh it so the chaff gets blown out. He was doing it in a winepress so no one would see him because he was scared of his enemy. He didn't want to be out there where they saw him doing that and they come and rob him of his wheat. So he was scared. He was living in fear. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, "The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valour." I wasn't there when it happened, but here's what I'm guessing that Gideon did. When the angel said, "The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valour," I'm guessing he did this. Who are you talking about? It cannot be me. Here I am hiding away, trying to thresh my wheat out in a winepress. Why on earth do you think that I am a mighty man of valour? You cannot be talking about me. And Gideon said unto him, "O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, then why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which did our fathers told of us, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites." He's gone to the angel, "What are you talking about? God's left us." He said, "Where are those promises that he'd made to us? And where's that God we remember that worked for our fathers, that he was there with them, that he brought them into this land? But now he's forsaken us because look at what has happened to us." Gideon missed the point. God had never left them. They had left God. Their circumstances they'd blown out so big. God hadn't changed, but the waves that were beating against them, they perceived that they had become much bigger than what God was. And they feared what was going on in their life. And they were imprisoned by that fear because they did not have the faith in their God that he was there for them anymore. And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's household. Gideon was a very unlikely war hero. His family were not a strong family. And he, as he described himself, is I'm the weakling amongst them. I'm not the strongest amongst even my family. Why is anyone going to follow me? He doubted who he was. He looked at himself in his own strength. He did not take into account who had just given him the guidance and direction to take those steps. He wasn't looking at the power that God would have behind him, to guide him, to direct him, to fulfill those tasks that he had asked him to do. He was centered only on, look at me, what could I possibly do in this circumstance? He was blinded by his own thoughts about himself and not what God saw was possible through him. In verse 16 it said, And the Lord answered unto him, Surely I will be with thee. Thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. And he said unto him, Now, I'm sorry, I've missed that one. Don't need to go any further than that. He missed who he was. Gideon missed who he was. The God called him to do something else next. He called him to set his house in order. He said, This is the task that I have for you. I know that you doubt what is possible because you look upon yourself as to what you think is possible in your own strength and own might. But here's what I need you to do first. Before I can ask you to go in there on my behalf, I need you to set your house in order. In verse 25, And it came to pass the same night, the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place, and take the second bullock and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day. He did it by night. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it. And the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said to one another, Who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the grove that was by it. And Joash, Gideon's father, said unto them, all that stood against him, Will you plead for Baal? Will you save him? He's saying, let Baal look after himself if he is truly God. He that will plead for him, let him be put to death whilst it was yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. God needed Gideon to take a stand. He needed him to take a stand in front of others, to be able to show them, this is who I stand for. And he stepped up and he tore down and he set in place his house. And he brought it into order by going in there and tearing down what was important to him, tearing down their idols that they had. He went in there to make a statement of faith about who he believed in and to remind them about who had brought them into the promised land in the first place, and who through could help them deliver victory over their enemy. The point I'm telling you here is, if we want to learn how to trust God, we've got to set our own house in order. Before God can use us in a mighty way, we must be magnified in our own, he must be magnified in our own life and in our own homes, first and foremost. No one is going to follow a leader who's worshipping at a different idol. There were no shortcuts here. God given him direction as to, you need to get your house in order, to knock down your idols. And it shows as we go on with the story, God honours those who honour him. In verse 33, then all the Midianites and Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew his trumpet after them. And Abiezr was gathered after him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, also all who gathered after him, and sent him messengers unto Asher, unto Zebulun, and to Naphtali, and then they came up to meet him. He sent out a messenger, and he could only do that with any sort of authority because he was able to set his house in order. That other people will go, that is a man of God who stands up for his God, who has faith in his God, who's prepared to put his God first. He reminded them of the powerful God that had brought them into that situation in the first place. From there, he gathered an army of 32,000 men. That he went from being this man who lived in fear, threshing wheat in a winepress, saying, I'm from the least of my family, I'm the least of my family in the least of the families. He said, how am I going to be called, going to be able to fulfill this? He honoured God first in his life, and others could see that. And when he called, they followed. But God does things in very unlikely ways. He called an army of 32,000 people together. And we're going to go to Judges 7. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. Joshua's plan A was to go to battle with 32,000 men against 135,000 men, and he would go in there with spears and swords. He was still looking at a 1-to-4 ratio. There's one of us and there's 4 of them, but do you know what? We're going to get it done. We're going to go in there and we're going to get it done with 32,000 men. That was Gideon's plan. He was ready to rumble. And in verse 2, and the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many. And he's got to, are you kidding me? I've got 32,000 against 135,000. You're telling me there's too many of them. The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. God doesn't forget how these guys got themselves into this position in the first place, where they thought really well of themselves and they forgot who God was. He goes, I'm not giving you guys another chance to do that. If we're going to go into this battle, and you're going to go into it knowing the only way that you are going to win this is through my hand. How miraculous is it when we do that in our own lives? You know, when those testimonies come along in your life where you go, yeah, I've done nothing to this. This is all God and all glory to him. God's plan B was to go in with 300 men. And I won't go through all the scriptures, but he went from 32,000 men and he whittled it down to just 300 men. 300 men versus 135,000 men. They went from going from 1 versus 4 to 1 versus 450. That's decent. And then he said, you're not going in with swords or spears. Do you know what he had in 300 men? 300 men who would do anything for him. Believed that absolutely God was with me. Because if they were mad enough to go into battle against 135,000 men, they knew that had nothing to do with them. And it was only to do with God. They knew the victory was only ever going to come through God, because those odds were ridiculous. But they were prepared to do it because they trusted and believed in their God. They stepped out of their prison of fear and they stepped into faith, knowing we remember our history. We remember who brought us here into this promised land, and we are going to follow him again. We are putting away those thoughts that we had about ourselves as to how good we were, and we're trusting in our God. Gideon's men surrounded the Midianite camp, and on his signal they broke the pots, revealing the torches. They blew the trumpets and shouted for the Lord and for Gideon. The Midianites were so frightened and confused they fought against themselves. God used Gideon and 300 men to defeat them all. In God's eye, plan B was always plan A. We can come up with what we think are the right things to do at times, as to the way that we think it should be going, as to what we should be focused on. At the end of the day, it matters very little, because God has a plan for us as to how it will work. And all he has asked us to do is to trust him, to believe in him, to have faith in him, that he will deliver us, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how long we feel as though we've been beaten down upon, regardless of the size of the enemy, regardless of what may come against us. He said, remember me and who is with you. He said, I see in you, Gideon, a mighty man of valour. Don't worry about who is there and who comes against you. Think upon only who is there with you. Who is there with you to defeat this mighty enemy that has come against you. Time and time again in Scripture, we see that God has used the most human of weaknesses to exalt his own strength. And this is absolutely his specialty. God rescued humanity from elimination by having a 500-year-old man build a boat in the desert. Doesn't make sense, does it? He saved baby Moses by having his mother float him down the river in a basket, and then had the daughter of the very king who decreed that all Israelite babies be killed adopt him and raise him in the palace. God waited until Abram was 100 years old before he gave him his promised son. He used a shepherd boy with a rock to kill a famous giant military champion in Goliath. He had Elijah pour water over the altar, enough to fill a trench around it, before burning up the offering with fire from heaven to humiliate the prophets of Baal. Jesus told the wedding caterers to fill the jugs with water, and he turned them into wine. Jesus told Peter to get a coin from the mouth of a fish. Jesus healed a blind man with spit mud, and he defeated death by dying. Jesus says in Luke 18:27, what is impossible with men is possible with God. When a small personal testimony, because we can find ourselves in a place where we think we're not the right person. We're not. This isn't me. This isn't my role. I can't see how what I have to offer is going to be any good, and we can live in that place of fear, not thinking about what we have been called into, and who is there in our God to support us. My personal testimony, about 2.5 years ago, Pastor Bill asked me a question that I never expected to hear come out of his mouth, and that was to become a pastor. And my first and most immediate reaction to him was, oh no, please don't ask me that. This wasn't a role that I was looking for. And he was looking for an answer within a week, and I told him maybe 6 months would become closer to an answer. I was talking to Vicky about it, and I was going through all the different reasons as to why this is why it should not be me. There's this, and there's this, and there's this, all these different reasons why I'm not the right person for this. And wives are wise, beware of them. She said to me, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the model that God uses through the entire Bible. I'm like, oh, dang. And he does. God's not looking for perfect people. He's looking for people who step out in faith. He's looking for people who don't need every skill that is required. They just need to acknowledge that, do you know what? God will give it to me. That through him, we can do these things. What he calls me into, I am capable, not because of anything that that I am, but because of who I can be when I trust and put my faith in him. It's not your battle. When looking through the account of Gideon, we look through Judges 6 and 7, which we've gone through, it's really interesting to notice how many times Gideon's story mentions God's actions. God approached Gideon to lead the charge. He sent Gideon. He promised to be with Gideon. He gave signs of assurance to Gideon. He filtered out the fearful soldiers for Gideon. He tested the troops at the river for Gideon. He promised to deliver Israel with 300 men. He told Gideon when to attack. He assured Gideon again. He handed the Midianites over, and he caused the Midianite army to turn on each other. We may think that this was Gideon's battle, but it was never his battle. It was God's, and it was always God's battle. The battle that lays before us may look overwhelming, and it may look like something that's too big a mountain for me to ever try and overcome. It's not yours, so let go of that. It's God's battle. Let him have the reins and take hold of it. We are simply there to be a part of his plan. It's not about you, it's all about him. The battle belongs to the Lord and not to us. It's for him and his glory alone. God will accomplish his plan, and it is his plan. He is the author and the finisher. When God says something will be done, you can know and trust that 100% it will be done. In Judges 6, 16 through to 23, God tells Gideon, I will be with you. You will strike Midian down as if it were one man. I will stay with you until you return, and don't be afraid, for you will not die. In Judges 7, verse 7, he says, I will deliver you with 300 men. God has a purpose and a plan, and he will be faithful to complete his plan. We are there to simply be a part of his plan. In Jeremiah 29:11 it says, "For I know the thoughts I think toward you, said the Lord, thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you an expected end." When we pray, instead of asking, God, I've got these plans and I'm thinking I might do this and I really want to do that. Can you bless that for me, please? I really want you to bless that for me. Rather than thinking about how God can be there with us for our plans, let's have a think about how we can be there, ready and available for his plans, how we play our part in his plans. Success comes from God's power and not our own. I love this line in Judges 7:17. And Gideon said unto them, he said unto his men, "Look on me and do likewise. Behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, and it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do." He said, "Watch me and do what I do." If you're a person in leadership here or a person of any influence here in the fellowship, here or elsewhere, this is so important for us to take part. Watch me and do what I do. It's so important that our people see us there, trusting our God, that we've removed ourselves from that place of fear. We've removed ourselves from wondering how can we do it, and we've placed ourselves in a position of faith, knowing that God is with us and before us, just as Gideon did. Gideon knew he wasn't the man, but he put himself in a place of faith where he knew God was the God. And he said, "Watch me and do what I do." Go forth, step forward in faith, knowing that the God has this plan for us, that we are here to fulfill that. Watch what I do, watch me and do what I do. Paul encouraged the church at Corinth to follow him as he followed Christ. We need to model trust in God through difficult circumstances. We need to walk by faith through uncertainty. And we need to model determination to reach others and to disciple them to be the same. Israel had come from a place where they trusted God and they overcame enemies. But as generations passed by, that was not modelled down through their leadership. And they lost it. And they lost that as part of who they were. It's so important for us that we pass that on. That when we lead with the authority that God has provided in our lives. That we step forward in faith and model what those in the Bible, those characters in the Bibles had, where they had trust and belief in the God who had brought them into that promised land in the first place. It's the final page. It was one of the strangest battles of all time. I don't think there'll be too many that come close to that one, where 300 men were able to battle against an army of 135,000 men and come out triumphant. There will be battles in your life where you feel like you are 300 versus 135,000. I've got no doubt about that. There'll be things that just in your life currently, previously, or they're coming up, where you felt like, I can't move. I'm living in fear as to what I should do and which direction I should take and how I handle this. It could be financial, it could be family, it could be provision, whatever it might be. We've all found ourselves in those circumstances at times where we think, I can't move, I don't know what to do. And do you know what? That's awesome. Because if you've got to the point where you admitted that I don't know what to do, there's a very obvious step after that God does. That's the first place we've got to bring ourselves into. We go, I might know not which way to step at this point, but my God does. If there are things in your life at the moment that are distracting you, about tidying your house up, that was one of the key things for me for Gideon. He had to go back there and tidy up his family's home, to bring to restoration their knowledge and understanding of their God, and placing their importance upon him as the first and foremost in their life, and not other distractions in their life, but to focus purely on him. Will you trust him today, despite what fears you may have? Will you step out in faith, despite those enemies that might surround you and those things that come against you? I hope you can find yourself in a position where you do, where we take time to be able to remember who our God is, what he has done for us, what he has filled us with the Holy Spirit, and the power and strength that we have within us through what he provides us with. Amen.